So yeah, what I was just about to say is that a lot of times we've talked over the years, we'll talk about something and it's certainly engaging during the conversation, but there'll be something that afterwards, kind of is still kind of, I'm working through it. It might be a terminology you've used or just, hearing someone else's expression, and that stays with me. So that part I did want to say, that's part of my inspiration. So it's funny, when I've thought about something like this, I'm like, okay, there's the order of someone's life. And then I said, okay, that's kind of played out like a little bit like, and I don't know that that would fit someone like you, because you're a little like, when we talk a lot of times it's forward and backward and wherever we don't want it to go. So I was thinking, starting with Dharma, because like, that's where I come in contact with you. And so my very first encounter with you is where I wanted to start. And then there's some other things we could pull out if they make sense. But my very first time that you really stood out to me, like I was a new person in KTD in a shrine room with about 200 people, 10-day teaching, lots of, great teaching from Khenpo Rinpoche, like very feeling a lot on myself, and I loved how the Q&A was. I mean, you'd have a whole afternoon. Everyone got a chance if they wanted to go up to the microphone, ask a question. And you came up, and I'd been there the year before, so I took stock of the people. But when you came up, you asked this question about, it was the beginning of the Pointing Out series in 2005. And
oh, what, really?
Yeah. And I mean, I'd seen you before, but it's almost like a spotlight went on you, because when you went up and talked about the, you read looking at,
right,
and that jumped out at me for two reasons. Because it was exactly what I was processing and thinking in terms of where we were at in that teaching, like what Rinpoche had asked us to do, what we were assigned to do, and what we were working on. And then you came up, and instead of well, if we can, I'd like you to read it, but it's also,
I'm trying to get it while we're talking.
But there's, and I hope you forgive the term, but there's like a nice, interesting natural loopiness to it, because we're looking at the mind that's looking at, and there's that kind of layered kind of experience to it. And I thought your poem captured the depth of what it's like to really try to look at one's mind and where that goes. And I liked it for several reasons, because well, afterwards I bought the MP3s of the teaching and listened to it like all the time, because I was really trying to dial in on what Rinpoche was saying and some of the exchanges, and that one always stood out to me, partly because it was almost, listening to the audio, it was almost like you had really put your time into writing down what you were doing, with your mind. And so that part, that just jumped out at me, and I've been crazy about it ever since. And I'm so glad that we've talked so much in the last year or so, because that was something that at the time I was like, that's just so cool. And I remember even playing it once around one of my friends, and they were like, what is that? That's so neat. And I was like, oh dude, like it is.
Well, I mean, one thing that you might want to know about, I'm trying to get this thing so I can read it to you when I have to, is that from a very young age, for a long, long time, I've been what's called a phenomenologist. I don't know whether you know what that is. It's somebody whose philosophy or psychology are the same, and all they're doing is looking at their own mind and their own experience, and not trying to reflect it from books and stuff like that. So that I have a long training in doing that. And so that, of course, when I'm trying to understand, of course, the 2005 teaching, the week before that, out at Crestone, he gave another teaching about the same length, but with Yeshe-la. I don't know what the title of it was, but it was pretty hot. I mean, it was pretty pithy. And so was the one 2005 is when I finally understood what I had to do if I wanted to recognize the nature of the mind. And I understood what I was doing wrong. And I never got that, even though I'd had the pointing out instructions before from him, but from Shama Rinpoche and so forth. And I never got anything, right? I just didn't get it. But when I left the 2005, I went home and did 3 years of intense practicing because I understood what I had to do. And Rinpoche pointed that out. So he didn't point out in that at that moment, I would see the nature of the mind. He pointed out what I had to do. But it took a lot of work. But it took 3 years to do it, right? And we could talk about that, but you want me just to,
yeah, go ahead.
or should we read looking at, it's not a great poem. It's a little, okay, it just says, it's pretty simple. I'll just try to read it slowly. I have to rethink it too. So it says, I'm looking at. I'm not looking at what looking at is looking at. No, I'm just looking at. That is, I'm trying to, you see, when I'm looking at, it's not looking at, I'm looking at, because when I'm looking at, what I'm looking at is also doing the looking at. So am I looking at or the looking at? So I'm not accenting it quite right because I haven't, I would need to read it again or something, but it's not great, but just sort of saying that this is just simply a definition of insight meditation. The difference between dualistic thinking and the immersion that Vipassana, of the special kind of insight meditation that's involved in Mahamudra teaching that we learned. That's what this thing is about. There was a point when I was doing photography out in the nature, when I was no longer just looking through the lens at the bug or whatever I was doing, but I was looking at the whole looking at. I was immersed in the looking at itself. And that's when I began to have, for me, it's not a big deal, but for me, it was a big deal. I began to understand how to do insight meditation, how to immerse myself in the present moment, which I never understood before.
It's so funny. There's a word you've used a lot, and I may have had several contexts, but I know in our past conversations when you said like immersion, I think something just got through to me why that word makes sense to me. Are you saying that, when a person is looking at something, right, and then they're looking at the one that's looking at, if those connect, right, then there's an immersion. There's literally, you're immersed in the process of, and actually, finally, the photography example made sense because you're with the whole of it, I guess you'd say, like the object being photoed, the process of, working with the device of a camera, and then also like there's the person looking at through the camera at the object. But if you immerse the whole thing into one, it's
right. Yeah. No, it's the dualism collapses.
Yeah, but it's the experience is there, but it's without the subject, object, and verb.
But the subject and object in that moment cancel each other out. They no longer exist. And then that's immersion. Immersion is you're no longer the looker or what's being looked at. You're just fully immersed. And insight meditation is like that. And if we go into insight meditation, even like the teaching says, try to do it, Rinpoche says, as long as it takes to pick up a cup of tea and take a sip. You don't have to do it long. In fact, you probably can't. But what you can do, it is repeatedly, one after the other, so that you're going in and coming out and realizing you've been in and maybe taking something from it. And I learned to do it while I did something else other than just that. It took me 1.25 years to learn how to do it while I wrote, was very, very difficult. One of the hardest things I ever did, because it's like a Charlie horse. I couldn't make my mind do what I wanted it to do. But then I finally realized it's a recursive series of immersions. Excuse me, like in a line, one after the other, back to back, and repeated so fast that you no longer see. It's just a blur. But you're still going in and coming out, going in and coming out, and going in, coming out, and you're bringing some of that clarity of immersion back out each time that you reflect. Say, oh, I just was in, right? But you're no longer, you're not even doing that. You do that at the beginning, but after about a year or so now, I just can do it all the time. That means I can just, you can say rest in the mind, but it's still a recursive repetition that's going on. It's not like I'm going in and I'm lost in the mind for an hour, although, excuse me, I can be lost in the whole process for an hour and realize I've been doing that. But what I'm doing is this repetition of it. So it's like taking a sip and a sip and a sip and a sip. So it's not enough to be immersed. You just have to know that you be aware that you were immersed. And just like that old thing about trailing clouds of glory to become that poem.
No, I don't know that.
Well, it's Wordsworth.
Okay.
But anyway, the point is that when we come out, we carry a whiff or a smell, or we bring something of that immersion with us, even though we could never put it into words. But coming out of it, we do have words. We're back into being dualistic, right? We're back into dualism. So when you write, that's dualistic. I'm writing about this object. I'm writing these words. So that's what I try to communicate to people, is that the process of insight meditation isn't one sustained long thing, although it might be nice, because then we would just be doing that. This, what I do, is going in and coming out, but I do it repetitively, and I've done it so long that I'm not even aware of it anymore. It's not at all conscious. It's just, I can just do that, right? Just, it's a stillness.
Okay.
So, anyway.
No. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. That I'm just need to get your feedback.
No, it's interesting because, I mean, two or three things. It sounds like the immersion work specifically with the action of working with the camera. It sounds like you took that and were able to kind of replicate that slowly into other situations using the same process or cognition or whatever, the same methodology maybe. But one thing I was curious, you had said that Rinpoche was showing you what you were doing wrong. Was it a two thing, or what was it that
I can try to tell it to you. What it was is one of the ways that he talked about students in Tibet learning this stuff. You remember when he said, is the mind the color red?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the mind the color green? And then he asked us to go and spend a night thinking about it and come back the next day. But he said that the same kind of students as we were, except monks, in Tibet would do each color 3 days and nights. And the whole process of different colors, like is it blue, took about 3 months of doing this constantly. So that got my attention, because when I first did it, when I go and look at the mind, it's the mind in color red, but my mind says, no, of course it's not the color red. The mind has no color. That was a conceptual interjection on my part, but that's not what he was asking us to do. And it was during that time that I realized I wasn't really doing what he said. What he really meant is that he wanted us to go and search the mind viscerally with our guts, like we would handle emotion. He didn't want us to think. He wasn't asking us to conceptualize anything. He was telling us to go and exhaust ourselves, struggling and straining to search in the mind like you would knead clay or dough, right? Massage it and start to exercise the mind itself, because the mind had never been exercised. You'd never taken that doughy thing and massage it so it became pliable. So when I started to do, and that's what I took away that year when I went back to our home, was that, oh no, he wants me to go and exhaust myself.
He did use that word. Yeah, exhaustive. I remember. And yeah.
So that's the idea. That's what I took away when I went home. And then I did 3 years of intensive training. And we could talk about that if you want. I think I told you and Elizabeth about that at one point. But I did it, and then I told him what I did, and he laughed because it was excessive, but it was very useful. So anyway, you know,
Sure.
in a nutshell.
Yeah.
What?
What was that? Yeah, you were
Okay,
saying.
what that was, first of all, when we start to really go into Mahamudra training, one of the things is what they call, I think, the special, you know, what is it? There's the preliminaries, the common preliminaries, extraordinary preliminaries, and the special preliminaries. And I think of one, I'm not sure this is it, but before someone begins to study Mahamudra, it's good to spend a great deal of time going over the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. I spent 3 years doing that exclusively. But what else as I did is that I started to, when I did work, and you know, I was a systems programmer, and I'm constantly interrupted by kids, family. Somebody honks, the phone rings, someone honks the car. Every time I was interrupted, every single time, I would stop what I was doing and offer it up, do the offering, and then do the going back into it, taking a vow again. So this could happen 5-6 times an hour. So I would completely stop, and I would do the dedicating the merit, and then whatever we do when we go back in, you know, I forget the words, but you can tell me the words because you would know them. And so I did that, and I did that for 2 or 3 years. That was an extraordinary amount of exercise.
And did you feel it was exhaustive? I mean, in the sense of exhausting out like all possibilities, exhausting probably your energy. I mean,
no, it's more like you just did it.
Okay.
And the doing of itself was what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, thinking about it, not important. The whole, I think one of the most important things I did, can't remember whether you were there. Do you remember when I introduced a technique that I had developed, and I give the derivation of it, about reactivity? You may not have been there.
There were a few years when I was away too, so
yeah. So I don't. But anyway, the idea was that all day long we react. We don't just react to lightning strike or a loud explosion. We react to, like, you know, I don't like the tie you're wearing, or I don't like the color of that dress that she's wearing. Those are reactions that accumulate karma.
Yeah.
Every last one of them. And it's not big karma like killing somebody or something, but it's micro karma that happens in thousands and thousands of times on a single day.
And so they get runaway. I mean, they're habitual, you know, and they perpetuate. So I
presented that to Kempo Rinpoche at the 10-day teaching during one of those Q&As, and I pointed out that this was a technique that's a precursor to Tonglen, because you don't do it with another person, you do it with your own reactions. And what you do is that when you become aware of that you've reacted, and this is relating to what we talked about, I'm going to bring it all together. When you are aware that you reacted, it's important to note that and to own that reaction, it was your reaction, and then to drop it. And so the reason I mentioned it here is that what I was talking about with the training I did for those 3 years was not a lot of thinking about anything. So we don't think a lot about what caused the reaction or get on that train of thought where we wonder, well, maybe I should have done this, or gee, that was bad of me, or they spoke bad of me. No, you just, you be aware that you reacted. You own that it was your reaction, nobody else's. No matter what they did to you, you have the control of your own, how you respond. And if we can't respond appropriately, but intend knee-jerk react, then we're creating karma. And so that's what I'm trying to point out here, is that during those 3 years, I did not spend any time thinking about the cause. And I think that's very important. All I did was rest in the mind, right, as much as possible. So somewhere along in there was how I completed the training needed. And then I think I told you and Elizabeth about it. Then I reached a point where I was working for NBC as a senior consultant.
Okay.
And they laid 10,000 people off, and I was one of them. And suddenly, this was when His Holiness first came to America in 2008, in June. And I was out at an astrology conference where I was speaking and doing all that kind of stuff that I do. And the guy showed up as my boss from NBC because he, wants to know all about astrology to many people. But I was the one that worked for him. And he laid me off just as the thing started. So it was really a bummer because I had no other way of making a living. And
when you say when things started, you mean that work starting, or the Dharma, where you were at in the Dharma process, something was starting?
No, I was in the Dharma. No.
You mean with the job?
I had done the 3 years of training.
Yeah.
And I was just going along, still doing the 3 years of training. And then I went to this thing and I got laid off and got very depressed from it because I was an relatively old person, even though I was, people trying to hire me. I don't think I would have had any trouble getting a job, but I'm a worrying person. And so at the same time, my wife called and says, KTD wants me to leave the conference and come to KTD and help with the camera crew, right? And so I did. I mean, I'd done my teachings there. I'd done my lectures, which I hate. I don't like to lecture. I like to have discussion. And so I left. I got on a plane, flew to Albany, and Margaret picked me up and I went, and then they needed me to be on the crew. And also they needed somebody that could go into places where they didn't want photographers. And I was such a known entity to them that I could be there, and they're not going to be worried about what I might do or think. Yeah. So I got to Karmaling and be with him and do all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure how we got here, but yeah.
There are two things that makes me think of is that you were in this process of, you were talking about kind of this process of non-reactivity, and yet you had this upheaval happen, or, a kind of an event happen. So was that the kind of thing that this caused you to kind of like have a turning point, or it just caused you to say, hey, I can't even have a chance to react to this? No,
that the reaction stuff was probably out the window
at that point.
Well, I mean, I came back from seeing His Holiness. It was great to see His Holiness, of course. Came back home, but I was still faced with the idea that I didn't have any income.
Yeah.
Which is, if you have kids, which I had, I have 4 kids, it's a serious thing. But so anyway, what I'm leading up to is that event, which managed to get me off my high horse, so to speak, and plunge me down to the depths of my emotions, was like a perfect storm, ready for the Dharma to act. I had to be depressed. Another way of saying it, I need to be pushed down from being kind of out of my body and running in the high mind, the high thinking, conceptuality, and not necessarily making the most sense of it. But then then I was so pushed out of my orbit that I was a free radical kind of. Had a freedom that I didn't even know existed. And so I started just going out every morning, and I did this from late May until the frost. I went out into the meadows and streams and stuff with cameras. I mean, the camera was my excuse to do it. And crawled through the grass and watched the sun come up for like 6 months straight. Which is, you have to think, when's the last time you watched the sun come up? And here I was doing it day after day, unless it was raining or something like that. And I didn't give a shit. But here's what's interesting that happened. And I try to convey this to people, but there's no one interested, mostly because it's just so personal. And I just have to collect my wits for a second. It might take more than a second.
That's fine.
Yeah. So I got out there. Oh yeah, here it is. And I would have think that if I was going to go through a spiritual breakthrough, and I'd always assumed that that would come, something if I was lucky, sitting on the cushion. Sitting in front of my shrine, what I'd done for decades and decades and decades.
Or right in front of a teacher. Yeah.
Well, not likely, but yeah, it would be nice.
Yeah.
But that wasn't it. And Rinpoche had always said to me and to all of us that, or I remember him saying to me that, Michael, I introduced you to the nature of the mind. I'm trying to find it. So the point, okay, yeah, what he said is that it was always saying we must become familiar with the nature of the mind. The familiarity is very important.
That's right. Yeah.
So the thing that happened to me that was unexpected, totally unexpected, was that in my sadness and downness and also freedom, I didn't give a shit about anything because I just had everything taken away from me that I needed. I'm a great provider, right? I very much believe in providing for my wife and kids. Very, very important to me. But in that moment, the familiarity was so, I went right past my Dharma cushion and right past all the years of Dharma training, which were a lot, going back to seriously since 1974 and, playing with it in the late 50s. I went back to the thing I knew best was my love of nature as a kid and the fact that we lived out sandwiched between two giant farms with no other houses in sight, no one to play with. Had younger brothers, but they're younger brothers. And so all I had was Mother Nature. So I made an extreme acquaintance with Mother Nature. I became really, really good at it. I was so good at it that I had a little desk in the University of Michigan museums when I was a teenager because I was so prodigious about it. My point is that the familiarity that was the birthing ground for my insight meditation wasn't what I did on a cushion. Even though I did my best, for a long time I just did two practices a day, morning and evening. But it went right back to the heart of my familiarity with the mind when I was most comfortable as a child resting in Mother Nature. So I'm just saying I bypassed my cushion entirely, and it was from that time that all of this insight meditation came out of me. And I think that's important because it points out that you're never going to be able to, if you're looking to be enlightened, you're never going to find it outside yourself. It's never going to be, let me just finish this.
Yeah, sure.
It's never going to be something that you're going to get. It's never something to get. And it can never come from outside yourself, but by definition has to come from inside yourself. But my own self, I didn't like myself all that much, and there was nothing inside that I wanted to become more familiar with, just because I was already familiar with myself, and that was disgusting enough in a lot of ways. So, but in that time of great personal stress, I relaxed and I flexed and I shot back to that time. And in that time, I was born into insight meditation. That's what happened. Now, I don't think that that would happen to anyone else particularly, but what would happen is no matter who you are, there's something inside of you that you are already familiar with. And that familiarity you need to find. And it's in that security and familiarity that you're probably the lotus flower is going to bloom. And now you can say whatever you want, but I'm saying that's the idea I'm trying to get across.
I'm glad I didn't want to, I'm glad I didn't jump in, because you're touching exactly what I was thinking, is that when you put all that together, I mean, the height of the emotional contrasts, like you said, kind of a bit of a depression, and then like just the sheer clarity of being
Free.
You said free and out in nature and not giving a shit a little.
Not giving a shit at all. Just fuck it.
And doing this process of looking at mind, like I could see a person. And first of all, nature also, like, nature is so wild, because like just yesterday I was watering my my garden at night, or right as the sun went down, and a giant owl landed, like on a dead tree, and it didn't see me at first. I was like, oh my gosh, it's way too close for me. And I was like, I got to get a picture of this to show my son,
Wow.
And I moved ever so slightly. It saw me and flew away. But the beauty is that when you see something in nature, like, there's so many words you could describe, like what kind of owl was it? Like, or I just said a dead tree. Like we can say all these different things, but when you're out in nature, like concepts drop so easily. Like when something just, beautiful occurs to us. And I think it's perfect for it. And then also, like you said, childhood familiarity means something to me too, because for me as a Dharma person, and I sometimes talk best on feeling, but I remember a lot of times when I would practice and have a particular, just a profound sense about it. Like it could be the feeling of feels nice meditating, or feels still meditating, or very clear. Those things reminded me of times where I would just be a child and sit in, when the sun comes in through a window, and just sit and be in that, just like sitting in the sun for a minute. And like, so I believe it's this kind of thing where the mind, you were saying those qualities are already there. They're not something that we have to acquiesce, but we have to acquaint ourselves to, and that's the part that I think is so easily lost in our lives. You know what I mean? Like, maybe as we get older, but it could be lost at any time. You know what I mean? But I thought that, I'm glad you kept going on it. I think it's awesome.
Well, anyway, that's what happened. And then after that happened, and now we can talk about Lama Karma for a minute. During this time, when if I wanted to invoke insight meditation, I couldn't do it on the cushion, and I couldn't do it at home. I could only do it if I took a camera and went out at the break of day and watched the sun come up, crawl around the grass. And that's why I was doing it all the time. I did it every day because I never had that kind of clarity, and I never had the relief from the release of the tension that dualistic thinking keeps us in. And so, but I didn't really put it. I didn't really understand what was happening to me. All I knew is that if I wanted to feel better than I'd ever have, I didn't even think of it as especially Dharma, right? It's not like I was saying, oh, you're now doing insight meditation, or you're doing this. I didn't even think of that. I was just 100% in it. And I didn't have to think about it or have any proof of it, because I didn't give a damn about anyone. I had nothing to prove to anyone, and it's nobody's business. So then winter came, and I had to go inside because you can't take cameras out in cold, and you don't crawl around in the snow, or I don't much, a little bit. So I tried to keep that thing alive. It never went away. It was recognition. It was a thing that was a one-time thing, like knowing how to turn on a light switch. Well, you don't, it's just what it is. Lama Karma came in that spring, following spring. And I was going out again as early as February and stuff, trying to reenact and continue that process. And he and I took a long walk, nature walk. And in that process, and this is where he does really totally come through 100%. And he sort of said, he says, I'll tell you what this is that you're going through. He says, there's your personal Lama like Khenpo Rinpoche. That's the root guru and so forth. Then there's the Dharma. So it's the Dharma of that Lama. He says, then there's the Dharma of the scriptures, all the texts, all the pith texts and stuff. Then there's the Dharma of, I think it was the Dharma of Dharmata, something that was beyond my understanding at the time. Then, last but not least, it says there's the Lama of not just Dharma, but Lama. There's the Lama of appearances. That's what you're doing, Michael, that you are being instructed by the Lama of appearances at a profound level. Those weren't his words, that's my words, but that's basically what he said. And that made sense to me. Then I understood better. And so from that point onward, I began to try to move that. It was just like a little window, but it wasn't everything. I couldn't just do it eating dinner, stuff like that. But what I really wanted to do was to begin to move that window, or to open that window, so that it could include what I always had done and wanted to do, which is writing.
Yeah.
Communicating with people. And it took me about 1.25 years, but it was ungodly difficult. It's not like I could just, I couldn't just take my mind and say, do this. It just wouldn't go. It just wouldn't do anything. So I had to, like the massaging thing we talked about, I had to massage my mind and very, very slowly got it to include the process of writing. So that's the end of that thought. But
well, with writing, because I find this interesting, like we were saying earlier about like you found this approach or methodology with working with the camera and then brought it to other things. With writing was one of the challenges. I know this sounds funny. Like sometimes I find this with music, like I'll kind of have a writer's block. You know what I mean? Like I'll give you an example. I'll write a song and say, no, this song needs a good bass line. Never happy with my bass lines because I'm a guitarist. I'm too close to the guitar line. So I'm always a little under that, to be honest. But I'll say it because sometimes like writer's block is this one thing when you sit down and write, because there's not the concept, right? And then as a meditator, conceptuality can be a bit of a thing. You know what I mean? Was it kind of calibrating yourself to, I'm guessing here, I mean, but towards like idea versus all that comes with ideas and then losing the process, or what? I mean, just curious.
no, it was the process. It was trying to take what we discussed about looking at, take the immersion thing that we talked about, the recursive. First of all, I'm saying this now, but I couldn't say that then. Taking the recursive process of dipping in and out of insight meditation and applying that to the process of writing, so that I could go take a word, a thought, and an idea, like a poem, but go in and have the clear insight that insight meditation gives us by dipping into it, but come right out of it and still remember enough of it to modify the words in the sentence to make them more perfect, to make them more like poetry, or really to give them the meaning that language can provide, but it's really difficult to give it enough sense. because language has to make sense. Sense is sensual. And if it doesn't have enough sense, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
And so learning to do insight meditation with writing, for me, was incredibly difficult. And when I did it, I was so happy. Couldn't be happier. And I do it to today, and every day I do it. It's a kind of a practice. It's a practice as good as any. If I went and sat on a cushion, it wouldn't be as good as what I do by just sitting down and weaving the mind stuff together with insight meditation. So, in fact, I don't do a lot of sit down practice anymore. I could. For me, there's so much effort that was involved in that has to be erased. So much effort has to be walked back. And I'm still but I'm walking it back not by doing it right now. I might do it again. I'm doing it by doing my Dharma to me, Dharma is nothing but learning how to rest the mind. It doesn't matter that I'm a nervous person and that I'm not a calm, stable, traditionally. It's nothing to do with it. The stillness of the mind is not about our nervousness or anything like that. It's something we learn. Shamatha, for instance. Shamatha and Vipassana are like a hand and glove. They go together. They're really only one thing. So whatever you call that, I guess we call it Mahamudra, actually. And I don't like to call it that because I don't want to be arrogant, but it's something like that. And I'm not, I'm not doing what Tilopa did or Milarepa did. I don't know what they did. I try to figure it out. I only know what I do. And even if it's nothing more than it is, it's all that I want. I don't have any sense of loss or something that's not fulfilled. I'm sure that, I'm just an ordinary person and I piss people off, as I just found out recently, because I'm so direct and, I guess I'm arrogant or whatever, but it just is what it is, right? So I don't know whether you're getting, as Vernon Hopkins said, suck any sense from that who can. So get anything out of that you can, right? But anyway, that's my understanding of what happened to what I call the birth of insight meditation for me.
So let me take one other angle that we kind of touched, because we're talking about something like the 10-day teachings, but what was, I guess there's like institutional perspectives, like the common, there's what every Buddhist says about teachers, but what's your feeling about the role of Khenpo Rinpoche in particular with you? Like, why? Let me put it this way, because I'm asking myself the same question a bit.
Sure.
Why is he unique? I mean, you've met other lamas, you've traveled.
Oh, I met tons of them, right? I met the 16th Karmapa and 17th Karmapa and right on down the line. First of all, as I think I've told you probably in one of our talks, Khenpo Rinpoche came to me in a dream. I had a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I met him, it was just like the dream. He was the man in the dream. And that was in 1983, October 30th or 31st or something like that. And from that time onward, but if you ask what did he do, first of all, he did all the things that you know about and I know about, the 10-day teachings. And also I was in charge of editing all that stuff for a long time. For a long time, I just did it. 10-day teachings, transcribed it. And then after a while, I paid for it and saw that it was done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the only thing the most important thing he did, and I think this is the most important thing any teacher can do, a Dharma teacher, is that he introduced me, as he said to me, to the nature of the mind. He pointed it out, and I didn't get it. And then in 2005, when you were there, he pointed it out, and I didn't get it on the spot, but I got, which I described earlier here, the idea of what I was perhaps doing wrong, which was not making it enough of a physical exercise, but I was just eclipsing it by just conceptualizing something. Of course, the mind is not the color red. I knew better than that, but I didn't. That's not what he's saying. He says, go off and spend night and day searching the mind to see if it's the color red. That's what I didn't get. And so the only thing, first of all, I think that once a root guru, that's why we call him a root guru, because he's the one or she's the one that points out to us the nature of the mind for the first time. And there can only be one, because a realization or a recognition isn't something you do over and over again. You turn the light on, and while it can go fallow, and if you don't practice it, in fact, the last thing Kempo Rinpoche said to me in 2019, when he was really sick and at the end of the 10-day teaching, was that, Michael, keep extending and expanding your recognition, your realization. And that's all you do once the nature of the mind's pointed out to you, is you become more and more incorporative, incorporating more and more of the world. I mean, they just say samsara and nirvana. Well, samsara has to be transformed in our mind, at least in the view, into nirvana. And that's a long task, right? And we start out by just expanding and extending our understanding and recognition or realization. Elizabeth doesn't like that word, but that's the one I always use. I was slowly realizing more and more. She would say slowly recognizing more and more. I don't care what you call it. So,
but I like how you said the word incorporated into different experiences.
Well, you want to, it's like a window that opens.
Yeah.
And you have to widen it like a diaphragm on a camera to be more and more of a wide angle, taking everything in. And it's also a great place to hide out or to rest. Hideout's not a good word. Just to be.
Yeah.
You don't have to, if I'm there every day for some period of time, what else do I need? I can't think of anything else that would be better, period.
So the other part there's two other parts about Rinpoche. What about him is unique? I mean, what I mean by, well, I guess you said he did come first in terms of pointing things out. Like he was the first to really kind of.
He's my root Lama, right? I mean, he's the one, Shamla Rinpoche didn't point it out. And no one else did. And none of the books I read, but His Holiness didn't, and the previous Holiness didn't, and Children Trungpa didn't, people that I had met. But Rinpoche did. And he knew that he did because he told me he did. And we would talk about it.
Yeah.
So that's what a Sawi Lama is, right?
Absolutely. No, that's the part I was looking for. And the last thing I'd say is I remember after Rinpoche passed, like actually that's kind of where you and I picked up the conversation after a while, because
I had no choice, right?
Yeah, well, we were both kind of like, hey, what's the word? Like, what's going on?
Right.
And it's funny because I had been up there and kind of gave you the pulse of how things looked to me at the time.
Exactly.
And I remember we caught up, I'd say a few months later, like on this echo effect of something, like right, there's what happens, and then there's kind of getting your head on it. And then it was one of these things where you used the term, and I thought it was really cool. You said it's a bit like the samurai Ronin, like someone who suddenly unleashed and masterless a little, and yet
totally.
And yet they're a potent person, like a Ronin isn't someone who's just kind of a surf let off the hook. They're someone who's trained. They're someone who's
totally
got some mastery and some effect, and so it's like one of these things where like, yeah, I mean, we'd leaned into this for a chunk of our lives, and certainly you more than I, more time with Rinpoche, but I say it because I really related to that in the sense that, One thing I was just telling my brother-in-law, who my sister-in-law died about 2 weeks ago, and I sent him a letter, and I was like, it's this weird thing about the phrase "life goes on," because it's true if you talk about, like, I don't know, breaking a tool or something, or an inanimate object, but when you talk about a person, it's weird when your life goes on, because the person you love isn't there to share it with you. The person, and in the case of our teacher, like, his influence, and of course the Dharmakaya is always there, and the teachings are always there, but the eminent person isn't there. And but I really liked that, and I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add on that Ronin idea. Really, same time, like, I have to acknowledge kind of what was in the question I asked you earlier with myself, is like, Rinpoche was just totally unique in the landscape of impressive people I've met in my life. I mean, even like, if to the point where it's like, sometimes people say, well, you Tibetan Buddhists, like, make more of the lamas, you worship them, they're your lamaists.
Right.
But I'm like, well, look, call it what you want to call it. This person is beyond the exceptional, even, like, and
Exactly.
yeah, and the effect on me. I mean, this is, and the part of the reason I wanted to ask you this too is, and maybe I could have asked the question a little more eloquently, but for me, I didn't set out on becoming a religious person. And at best, you could say before Dharma, I was spiritual in ways, but really, like, he got something out of me that, if for a while it scared me, because I was like, man, am I ever going to find that again? A lot like when you get broken up with for the first time or something, you're like, man, am I ever going to find the condition of love again? And
Right.
I mean, but it's weird. It's been a few years and I feel better and better. I feel okay. I feel like it's still with me, but yeah, I don't know how, yeah, I'm baffled, and I say it because you've clearly, like, ran into lots of interesting people and things throughout your life, and yet he seems exceptional. So I just, that's
Yeah, but
why.
see, I think that's something that's unique to you and unique to me, that he's our teacher. He's our root Lama, the Sawi Lama. Someone else might not see that.
True.
And
Yeah.
I think that's what it is, that's what Samaya is. We bonded with him, right? I don't even know. I have brought other people to KTD and stuff
And they
who
didn't.
also who also really got a hit with him.
Uh-huh.
But I guess I don't try to explain it to anyone, because who's going to understand that? And it's just going to be some contentious thing. My Lama is better than your Lama.
Yeah.
But it's our Lama, right? And there's no explaining it that I
Yeah,
know of.
I think that's the beautiful thing too, because to the other point, it's like, I'm very confident there's other people getting that kick from their Lama in their lives. And it's some sort of, I mean, I don't want to throw the word karma around too much, but what was karmic for me and what's karmic for somebody else is unique,
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's the whole thing why I keep harping on the concept of Yidam. The Yidam is the unique path each of us takes to enlightenment, and nobody else can take that path, because it's unique to our personal background and stuff. It's one that's just going to work for us. What worked for me is not going to work for you, and vice versa. I mean, it might kind of work, but we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
But we're not, at some point, awaking, becoming aware of something that's going to, I have to be tweaked in a certain way by my teachers, and you do the same thing, but it's not the same. I guess it's not the same. I don't think it's the same.
Well, even if you and I were very much the same, I mean, we're coming in at different ages. You just said earlier, like raising family and kids, that's all new to me. that's
yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's, everyone's different, but I think it's such a beautiful thing, I mean, at least let me put it to you this way, is that as unique as things are, I've always found it, how you've explained your lot, and it seemed always very genuine to me, and something that I could relate to, even if it wasn't exactly my song. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
it's
sure. Well, we're singing in the same choir, right?
Yep.
No, and also I'm going to be 82 in 4 days.
Yeah.
That's a lot older.
Yeah.
So there's a lots to think about that. Going through that, it's just a total trip. My body's falling apart. My mind is pretty good, but I've had 3 strokes. I can't remember everything as well as I did. I sure was a lot smarter than I am now, but I'm still, the essence of me is still there. And the Dharma is still my guide, something that I follow. And I think you must do the same, and so must everyone. Or just like Elizabeth has Kemal Sotram.
Mhm.
And we know, if we met him, I'm sure you have, I know I have. Yeah, he looks pretty wonderful,
Yeah.
and very different than Khenpo Rinpoche.
But he's one of those lamas that sparks karma for people, I feel like.
He does. Well, he
Yeah.
sings and he dances around, I guess, and does all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And he doesn't stand on tradition. He likes to break it up.
Well, that's the thing that this is it may bleed into other subjects, but like, you had mentioned the phenomenological approach. And what I do think, and I also thought of this too, is that like, in the terms of this conversation, you laid out how things worked for you around pointing out, which is what I was asking. But at the same time, like, I know because of other conversations we had that you did do all the traditional things that Rinpoche put forth, all the Yidam practices, you put effort forth, even though you're like, man, I'm not finding all the traction with this that you would eventually find with the pointing out. And I say it because I'm also baffled by the fact of, I think how to say this, Tibetan Buddhism is totally got a great methodology. It all makes sense. It's all very linear. Everything fits. And yet, if you look at the stories of, and so that stands alone, you could show it to someone and say, hey, do you think this is a methodology and approach that would work? And someone might say, yeah, I think it's pretty rational and thought out. And I think it's reasonable. And yet there's a whole history of practitioners who try to do that, and it shoots them out some other side of it based on their own. We were talking a minute ago about karma and a bit of their own individual character. That comes into play too. And when these things address each other, it's not always in this nice, organized, straight line, but it always answers what the person was.
That's the Yidam.
Yeah, and it's so amazing to me because, like, if you look at, a classic one would be some of the Mahasiddhas. They're all out in the straight and narrow, like, Naropa starts out that way, and then he has these visions, and then he's off in a different direction and doing it all in a different way. And I mean, granted, his story is so wild, right? But like, I think for so many people, there is this human aspect of like, there's a teaching and there's who we really are. And like, to what you were saying about Rinpoche, like being genuine and exhaustively putting ourselves through some of these teachings is what, I don't know, like, I think has that real effect somehow. Even if reciting a certain amount of practice or doing a certain thing by the book isn't the end game, that's just something to get a person going. I'm fascinated by that part. But anyways, yeah.
Well, I think that, you and I both did all the traditional practices. I did Nundo twice, and I did different deity practice like Karma Pakshi and Vajrapani and Chenrezig and Amitabha. But deity practice and I never could get along. I did it, and Karma Pakshi, as you probably know, quite detailed.
Yeah.
And sulk and all that kind of stuff. But I was born to be a Mahamudra practitioner. Maybe it's because because I was an archivist and a systems programmer and did all this extremely detailed stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'd already mastered that a long, long time ago. In fact, it took me, I practiced shamatha for 32 years and was unable to do it. And the point was, I finally realized through the whole thing we were talking about earlier, was that because I already knew it. I already did it every time I programmed. Everything I did had to be extremely exact. Or, one line of code, one single character, and the thing won't work.
Yeah.
So that I finally realized when insight meditation came, I just got out of the thing that I jumped right out, snapped like a rubber band, right out of the idea that I couldn't really master shamatha and realized, hey, I totally mastered shamatha to the best of my ability. And it just immediately worked with insight meditation just perfectly. And so, so I was beating myself up for years because it was just so boring compared to the shamatha I'd learned by stuff I was absolutely fascinated by, programming, nature, all this stuff that I did. That's the way to do Dharma practice, but it's very hard to prescribe that and also have the joy of doing it for me. Pretty boring. And I've spent years trying to remove the effects of effort. We talked about this a little bit earlier, trying to remove the scars of effort of all those years of practice of making myself do stuff, which is not the same as doing stuff. You know this.
It's there's a quote that I've joked with Elizabeth about, and I think it's come up in a session of ours too. But in Moonbeams, Sangpa Gyare from the Drukpa Kagyu says something like, "Many know how to meditate, but few know how to let go." And
right.
Actually, she said that sometimes people translate, and I've found other translations where they say few know how to destroy meditation, like how to, and I'm like, wow, that's a harsh word, but it's funny because yeah, it is funny that point of what's the word you used a minute ago? Like it almost sounded like you had to heal yourself from all this effort, like a little bit.
I don't know what I said. I just said you have to the scars of effort
Yeah,
are an obscuration, right? They're huge obscuration that have to be carefully removed before you're free. And if you look, they don't, Mahamudra and Dzogchen are not called meditations, they're non-meditations.
That's right.
They make it totally clear. Every textbook says it. You have to stop meditating. You can't, anything that has effort is not Mahamudra or Dzogchen. That's my understanding of it. And also that's my experience of it. And I'm still removing the effort of all those years of doing stuff and not knowing what I was doing exactly, or not enjoying it enough, or waiting for it to be over, or waiting for me to march through it. All that stuff was wrong stuff. And but then you said it pretty nicely. It is a regime or regimen that we have to march through. And it's better than nothing. Without that, we wouldn't know what to do. So knowing when to remove the scaffolding of all our years of practice is also just as important as all those years of practice. So,
I love that analogy, actually, because if without scaffolding, there's a lot of work you can't do. And you know what I mean?
well,
Literally.
right.
And
right.
similarly, if we did this without any structure, like how could we paint our Sistine chapels, or
right.
above the first floor, yeah.
So we have to know when to get on the train, but we also have to know how and when to get off the train. So I don't do much of that. I still can do some of it, but not, I'm still recovering from all of that obscuration from effort, learning to be free, and enjoying insight meditation, beyond words, no words for it. Just as like, what a pleasure.
I think it's beautiful to hear. Yeah.